In today's Lords of the Fallen video, we'll take a look at some of the biggest tips I wish I knew the first time playing. There were quite a few mistakes I was guilty of on my first playthrough that kinda impacted my progress, just made things unnecessarily difficult. And I also have some heads up to some very important mechanics that you definitely need to keep in mind. If you end up finding this video useful, a sub would really help me out, and let's jump right in. Now, starting things off with the navigation, this is going to eventually be one of your biggest headaches, mainly because the maps are very interconnected and as such easy to lose yourself into. This is where your umbral lamp comes in and helps a ton in two ways. One of which, if you pull it up, you can just take a glimpse into the other realm, which is going to reveal if there's any gaps in the walls or any doors that you can pass through that are locked in your realm but non-existent or opened in the other one. So this can help you reach new areas or even caches of loot. But eventually you will want to travel to this other realm anyway, either by dying or by using your own lamp, as this is the only way to gain access to new areas. For example, platforms or even staircases, and many times going under lakes and such is the only way possible by just traveling to the umbral instead. Plus, it's kind of like a place that has its own mechanics. It's this game's own gimmick, but in a very cool kind of way. There's constantly going to be enemies that spawn and try to chase you. Plus, if you wait for too many minutes, eventually there's going to be a very relentless boss that will start pursuing you. So you don't want to linger for too long and find a body to reanimate yourself back to life. However, there is one advantage, and that is, well, you can remove most if not all of the environmental hazards. So let's say you're in an area with a ton of loot, but it's filled with poison pools or with lava. You can just pop in the other realm, completely avoid all that damage and build-up, and just collect your loot in peace. Additionally, you can also use the free camera from the photo mode to scout a bit ahead. This is going to give you a bit of room to look in the environment and see if there's anything you might have missed, maybe a ladder or an access point to some of the other platforms you might want to reach at. Moving on to number 2, absolutely make sure you collect umbral scouring all the time. You find these mainly from activating memories, and you can see them in the environment by these moth blue-like clouds that you can activate by popping in the other realm and then using your lamp to trigger them. This gives you a bit of lore as well, and it's the main way to kind of tell a story, but at the same time they give you a number of these scours, and you will need a ton of them, as that's the main way to buy boss items like armor sets and really cool weapons. And speaking of those, you can actually buy a ton of them from MOLHU right here at SkyRest. You need to pop in the other realm and head over to this room onto the right side, but he does a number of things, and one of them is that he sells the boss remembrance items. So really powerful armor sets, really cool armors. They will cost a lot of these umbral scourings, which is why you will need to grab a ton of them. There are many boss enemies with many unique armors and loot, so you will want them, and this is the price you have to pay for them. But remember, says even though you do get them from the boss encounters, they don't drop from the bosses themselves, and you can easily miss them out. So once you defeat a boss, pay attention to any additional memories lingering around the battlefield, as that's what you need to activate to get that remembrance in the first place. Otherwise, you can completely miss that out and then wonder why you don't have access to those items. This is the reason why. Moving on to number 4, the next thing you need to keep an eye out for is going to be your SANGUINARIX. This is your healing item, and you can increase both its potency as well as its charges by upgrading this with the Saintly Quintessences. So to find these essences, you need to keep an eye out for these statues with the yellow hue/halo around their heads, as they will indicate they hold one of those quintessences. You will find quite a ton of these, and eventually you can upgrade these at Pieta. She is going to be one of the first boss that you have to defeat, but she's also going to make her way to SkyRest. So once she does that, you can use her to upgrade your SANGUINARIX. And yeah, this is going to, as I've said, make it much better, get more charges, and eventually help you a ton from sticky situations. Now, another cool mechanic that Lords of the Fallen has is that it lets you place your own bonfire/resting place, but you will need a vestige seed for that. These drop from most bosses, but random enemies also have a chance to drop them too. So you can use these to place them down on something called flower beds. You will see them by their distinctive look, but also paying attention to the lamp, as it will do this ping once you're close to one. There were many situations in which I was very far into progress from the previous bonfire or very close to a boss fight. I did not want to backtrack again, so placing this down can help a ton with that. Oh, and speaking of not losing any progress, you can also use Vestige Moth to just travel to any previous used bonfire slash, well, resting place, as this is going to let you do that without wasting any of your gathered vigor. So this is especially useful if you accidentally dropped into a boss room but with a ton of points that you might want to use to level up your character and gain some stats. Moving on to 6 and some combat related tips. First of all, yeah, the dodge in this game is a bit more forgiving than Dark Souls slash Elden Ring, as you pretty much get complete immunity when you're doing that dodge for like a full on second, maybe slightly more than that, but it lets you pretty much dodge into enemies without worrying, even if they physically do touch you, for example. So this is something that you can use, for example, if you're in a very tight gap area and want to pass a charging enemy, you can actually roll into him and they will not hit you most of the time. Another one is to pay attention to any blue colors or tints around an enemy's HP bar. If it's fully blue, it means they are completely immune and you will have to break one of these wisps that actually linger around them but on the other realm. You can either use your lamp or just pop in the other realm and destroy it with a weapon. But there are also many of these situations with a ton of them active at the same time, case in which it's going to be difficult. So you will want to still destroy them because they either make that enemy immune or just give them a ton of HP regeneration. Now my damage over here is really high compared to these enemies, but if I were to do it the normal way at low level, they would be extremely difficult until I actually come in and destroy these wisps or whatever they are. Also, speaking of the umbral powers, another cool mechanic is that you can rip the souls out of your enemies and deal damage to them while they are stuck in that animation for a few seconds. So this can actually let you unleash a ton of damage very fast, wither their HP, and once you're done with that, just make sure you hit them again so that that damage counts and you can take huge chunks of their HPs in like seconds. It won't work on every single type of enemy, but there are many of them, including bosses, that it can be used against, especially the ones that are on the same size as your own character. Moving on to the next tip, of course, you can switch weapon stances. Many of them kind of have two modes, one of which is more aimed towards AoE, high swings, and dealing damage to as many enemies as possible, while yeah, they can also have this more focused single target hit that can be more useful in tunnels or areas where you might bump your weapon against walls. You don't really want to do that, so constantly switch stances and keep in mind of their strengths and weaknesses. Many of them become either faster but at the cost of dealing less damage in one hand, or even slower but dealing more damage when dual wielding them. So it's a matter of testing out and finding what you like most. Generally speaking though, long swords, polearms, and even spears are some of the best I tried, but yeah, axes can also be really great when talking about melee damage. But another even more important tip for combat is to not overlook resistances, and especially the bombs and the cures. You will have all of these in your inventory, there are many of them, and they can make a huge difference against many of the bosses that might use elemental damage and build up against you, be it bleed, fire, holy, and everything else in between. So just to show you the difference, I already have high bleed resistance with this armor, 395, but I can just pop off this like random bomb you can already find from level 1 and it brings it to over 500, which is going to make a huge difference in combat. The difference between getting one-shotted to just tanking multiple shots to the face. And speaking of elemental imbuements, it's very important to use them on your weapons since this is going to increase your DPS tremendously. Even on bosses that are technically resistant to that element, like for example Pieta to fire damage, it still makes a significant difference by applying it on a weapon and using it against her. And there are many more like poison and holy that eventually will create build up and give you other benefits. So for example, in the case of the holy, which is my favorite, once the build up is full, it's going to zap that target with a lightning strike, with a smite damage basically, which is really awesome and increases your DPS by a ton, but all of the others give other benefits too. Oh, and one final survivability tip, you can use the Umbral Realm in two ways to kind of gain HP if you, for example, no longer have any healing items. So one of them is by just using your lamp to destroy some of these blue orbs, which is going to replenish your HP in a wither state, but if you just deal a bit of damage after, you can fully replenish it and have it like any healing item. Pretty awesome and comes in quite handy in many boss fights. You can also do around the same by just triggering the Umbral Realm with your lamp. This is going to completely replenish your HP, minus a bit of percentage over there that will be withered. However, you can just damage an enemy or anything in the environment and replenish it back if you don't have any healing items left. But moving on, don't fall for the game's biggest trick, which are these so-called dropped items that are in fact traps that will absolutely eat your face off. So they look exactly like almost any other type of item that drops on the ground, except there's one big giveaway, which is the tail. It's kinda too flaily, it dances a bit too much compared to the one in the background, for example, that is a lot more stationary, doesn't move as much, it's also smaller and much less bright. So don't fall for these, and by the way, they can also move in the rooms. So for example, just because you died to one in a corner, it doesn't mean it won't spawn in a different side of the same room after you just came back. I've literally seen that happening, and I had that happening to me, and it's not pleasant, let me tell you that. Speaking of unnecessarily difficult things, also pay attention to these orange lamps on the ground. You can actually spot them in many occasions. They are kind of like the revenge mechanic from Dark Souls or Elden Ring. You can activate them and they will lead you to a tough enemy that might have defeated another player at some point. So these will be cranked up versions of that enemy, much more HP, more damaging and more attacks. But if you defeat them, they will give you slightly more vigor and also some of these eyes. Yeah, you can use these eyes back at Skyras to grab some exclusive items that you only get from PvP related activities. You also get them from PvP, of course, but yeah, this is one of the ways to grab them if you just want to purely focus on PvE. Moving on to number 9, pay close attention to these moth nests. Yeah, there are a lot of them and these enemies can be quite tough early on, the flying ones, but that's because they protect an important item. So once you defeat them, go ahead, rip that statue clean off, and this is going to usually drop a unique item like a very good upgrade or even weapons. Many times you can find them from these named weapons that can be very strong. And they can also drop Umbral Scourings, way more than the usual memories, almost on the same scale as bosses, so totally worth it. But moving on to number 10, we talked about customization. Yeah, this game has a ton of them, including armors, but most important, also keep an eye out for the tints. So this is kind of like just shades slash colorings you can find randomly for any single armor set. So this is going to let you color every individual piece and kind of give a different look. It's only color schemes, but it's still pretty okay because you do find a ton of them. Plus, PvP will unlock even more unique ones that you can apply to gear and look really the part. Moving on to number 11, if you talk to Pieta, you might have noticed that she has the ability to reset your build. Well, to do that, you're going to need an item called, yeah, this right here, the Rebirth Chrysalis. But this is a very rare drop. I only got one in my entire playthrough. However, you can just buy one for 8 Gs right here from MOLHU back at Skyras. So he sells these, you can just buy them right away and then reset your skill back at Pieta and invest those points again if you want to test a different build or you're not content with the one that you just got. And finally, yes, it's totally possible to unlock additional new classes than just the 9 or 10 initial ones, and that's by finishing the game. Different endings give you different new classes, and they are usually much stronger than the usual ones. Higher level, but also gaining items that you normally get much later on. So this includes both weapons, but also spells that you normally get at around the middle of the game, for example, which is very helpful in this case. We're gonna have a full-on video on all the extra classes very soon, so definitely make sure you subscribe and activate that notification bell if you want to see those. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.